My name is Nia. I am 34 years old, and I run a highly successful luxury real estate and staging company in Prince George County, Maryland. 6 days after I underwent a grueling spinal fusion surgery, I received a text message from my husband Marcus. It read, "This Saturday, all 15 members of my family are staying at our house for 2 weeks." I was lying in bed trapped inside a rigid medical back brace. The incision on my spine was still fresh and occasionally bleeding through the bandages. I could barely walk to the bathroom without assistance. I grabbed my phone and replied, "I just had major surgery. Please postpone it until next weekend. I need time to heal." I watched the typing bubble appear on the screen. Marcus replied coldly, "No one is waiting. Just do as I say." He did not care about my pain. He only cared about showing off to his relatives. But what he did not know was that by the end of their stay, his entire family would be standing on the curb with their luggage and a police escort. Before I tell you how I reclaimed my peace and my property, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to set ruthless boundaries with toxic in-laws. The days leading up to that Saturday were a blur of physical agony and emotional dread. Marcus was 36 years old and worked as a credit appraiser, but he carried himself like a billionaire. He loved the prestige of my success but resented me for earning it. I had purchased our luxury penthouse before we even got married. I paid the mortgage, I covered the utilities, and I bought the custom velvet chairs and imported chandeliers that made the place look like a magazine cover. Marcus just lived there, driving a leased Mercedes he could barely afford so he could flex on his fraternity brothers and his family. I was the financial backbone of our marriage, but in his mind, he was the king of the castle. On the morning of their arrival, I forced myself out of bed. Every movement sent a sharp electric shock of pain shooting down my legs. The doctors had warned me that spinal fusion recovery was brutal and required absolute rest. I managed to put on a loose silk robe over my back brace, hiding the thick medical straps beneath the expensive fabric. I slowly made my way to the living room, taking careful, measured steps. I lowered myself into my favorite accent chair, gritting my teeth against the intense throbbing in my lower back. I just wanted to rest in the quiet of my own home. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, the peace was shattered. The doorbell did not just ring, it buzzed repeatedly in a loud, obnoxious pattern. Marcus practically sprinted to the door, his chest puffed out, ready to play the role of the generous, wealthy provider. When he swung the heavy mahogany door open, the noise hit me like a physical blow. 15 people poured into my entryway, all talking over each other, laughing and shouting. They did not bother to wipe their shoes. They dragged heavy plastic suitcases with broken wheels directly over my pristine hardwood floors, leaving deep scratches in the finish. Cousins, aunts, and uncles swarmed into my living room, dropping duffel bags onto my expensive white sofas. The sheer volume of people in my carefully curated space was suffocating. No one looked my way. No one asked how my surgery went. No one offered a gentle hug or a word of sympathy for the fact that I was clearly in immense physical distress. Then came the matriarch. Odessa, my mother-in-law, marched through the front door like she owned the building. She is 60 years old, but carries the bitter, judgmental energy of someone who has spent her entire life finding faults in other women. She wore a bright, patterned dress and carried a knockoff designer handbag that she immediately dropped right onto my antique Persian rug. She did not greet her son. She did not say hello to me. Odessa stood in the center of my entryway, placed her hands on her hips, and slowly looked up at the vaulted ceilings. She squinted her eyes and let out a loud theatrical sigh. "Look at those corners," she announced, her voice echoing off the walls so everyone could hear. "There are cobwebs up there." She turned her sharp gaze toward me, sitting frozen in my chair. "You have been home from the hospital all week, Nia. Are you just laying around doing nothing while my son works his fingers to the bone to provide for you?" The audacity of her statement left me breathless. I was literally wearing a medical brace to keep my spine from collapsing. My company paid for the very roof over her head. Marcus had never provided a single dime toward this property. Yet here she was, standing in the home my blood, sweat, and tears had bought, treating me like a lazy servant who had failed to complete her chores. I looked at Marcus, expecting him to defend me. I expected him to remind his mother that I had just undergone major spinal surgery and needed rest. Instead, Marcus just chuckled nervously and rubbed the back of his neck. He looked at me with a warning glare, silently demanding that I keep my mouth shut and play along. "You know how it is, Mom," he said, trying to sound authoritative. "She has been taking it easy, but we will get this place cleaned up for you." I gripped the armrests of my chair, my knuckles turning white. The physical pain radiating from my spine was entirely eclipsed by the burning betrayal in my chest. My own husband was throwing me under the bus to appease his toxic mother. The rest of the family continued to unpack their belongings carelessly, tossing coats over my delicate staging furniture and loudly claiming which bedrooms they wanted. They were treating my private sanctuary like a cheap motel, and Marcus was handing them the keys. Odessa took a few steps closer to me, looking down her nose. "A good wife keeps a clean house no matter what," she muttered loudly enough for the cousins to hear. "In my day, women had babies in the fields and went right back to work. A little backache is no excuse to let a home fall into disrepair. I hope you plan on cooking tonight because we traveled a long way and we expect a proper hot meal." I stared back at her, my expression completely blank. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I just sat there absorbing the profound disrespect vibrating through the room. They thought I was weak because I was injured. They thought my silence meant submission. They thought they could invade my home, disregard my health, and walk all over me without facing any consequences. But as I watched them scatter their luggage across my beautiful home, a cold, calculating clarity washed over me. I realized that my marriage was not just toxic. It was a parasitic arrangement designed to drain my resources and break my spirit. Marcus was never going to protect me from his family because he was exactly like them. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I knew right then and there that I was not going to argue with them. I was not going to beg for basic human decency. I was going to let them get entirely comfortable in my house, and then I was going to legally and ruthlessly remove every single one of them from my life. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the restrictive tightness of the medical brace against my ribs. Every inhale was a reminder of my physical vulnerability. The room was spinning slightly from the strong pain medication I had taken earlier that morning, but my mind was sharpening by the second. I watched Marcus lead his uncles toward the kitchen, loudly offering them top-shelf liquor that I had purchased for client gifts. He was pouring my expensive scotch into glasses, acting like the benevolent host of a mansion he did not own. The cousins were already turning up the volume on the television, drowning out my thoughts with the blaring sounds of a sports game. Children were running down the hallways, their heavy footsteps echoing through the penthouse. My beautiful, quiet sanctuary had been transformed into a chaotic nightmare within a matter of minutes. Odessa was still standing nearby, expecting me to apologize for the imaginary cobwebs and promise to cook a feast for her sprawling family. She thrived on making other women feel small. I finally broke my silence. I looked directly into Odessa's judgmental eyes. My voice was calm, low, and completely devoid of emotion. "I will not be cooking tonight," I said simply. "I am recovering from surgery and I need to rest. Please make yourselves comfortable with whatever Marcus provides." Odessa's mouth dropped open in shock. She was not used to being told no. She turned to Marcus, her face twisting with indignation, ready to complain about my lack of hospitality. Marcus immediately shot me a furious glare, his ego bruised in front of his family. He marched over to me, his heavy footsteps vibrating through the floorboards and sending fresh waves of agony up my spine. The real nightmare was only just beginning, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Before Marcus could formulate a response to my refusal, the heavy oak front door swung open again. In walked Jamal, Marcus's younger brother, followed closely by his wife Brittany. Brittany was holding a massive iced matcha latte in one hand and her phone in the other, completely ignoring the fact that she was stepping onto my pristine hardwood floors with muddy designer sneakers. She dragged 3 enormous hard-shell suitcases across the threshold, letting them bang loudly against the doorframe. Brittany had always possessed a profound sense of entitlement, the kind of weaponized obliviousness that allowed her to make outrageous demands while wearing a sweet, innocent smile. She looked around the chaotic living room, completely bypassing any basic greeting, and locked her eyes directly on me. "Naya, babe, perfect timing," Brittany chirped, pointing a manicured finger at the mountain of luggage she had just dragged inside. "Do you mind running these up to the second floor for me? Jamal has a bad shoulder from playing golf last week, and I absolutely cannot lift anything heavy right now. I sat there in my accent chair staring at her in sheer disbelief. I was visibly wearing a thick, rigid medical brace that wrapped around my entire torso. The straps were thick and bulky, protruding from underneath my silk robe. Anyone with eyes could see that I was practically immobilized. I just had spinal fusion surgery 6 days ago, Brittany. I said, my voice steady but laced with warning. I am not carrying your bags up a flight of stairs. Brittany let out a dramatic, breathy sigh and rolled her eyes, shifting her weight to one hip. Oh, come on, Nia. I know you strong black women can handle absolutely anything. You always push through. Just take them up slowly so you do not scratch the paint on the walls. I really need to get unpacked. Also, what is the plan for dinner? Jamal said you were doing all the cooking for this trip. I am strictly doing keto and organic farm to table right now. Please tell me you did not just buy regular vegetables from the discount store. My digestion is super sensitive. The sheer audacity of her microaggressions hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She had just walked into the home that I paid for, demanded that I act as her personal bellhop, despite my fresh surgical wounds, and then had the nerve to dictate a specialized menu for me to cook. I turned my gaze away from her and looked directly at Jamal, who was busy scrolling through his phone, pretending not to hear his wife treating me like the hired help. Jamal! I said, my tone dropping to a dangerous icy register. Your wife seems to have lost her mind. You know exactly what medical procedure I just went through. Pick up your own luggage and carry it up my stairs. And if she wants an organic keto meal, she can download an app and order it herself. Jamal finally looked up from his phone, his face twisting into an ugly scowl. He turned to Marcus, shaking his head in exaggerated disbelief. Bro, are you really going to stand there and let your wife disrespect us like this? We just drove 4 hours to get here, and she is giving us an attitude about a couple of bags and some dinner. That was the trigger. Marcus's fragile ego could not handle being questioned by his younger brother. He needed to assert his dominance. He needed to prove to his family that he was the absolute ruler of this household, even though my bank accounts funded his entire reality. Marcus marched across the room. He did not say a word. He grabbed me by the upper arm, his fingers digging into my skin hard enough to bruise, but positioned perfectly so no one else in the room could see the physical force he was applying. He yanked me upward. A blinding flash of agony shot down my sciatic nerve, radiating from my surgical incision all the way down to my feet. I gasped, stumbling slightly, but Marcus did not care. He forcefully steered me out of the living room, down the short hallway, and shoved me into the walk-in kitchen pantry. The heavy pantry door clicked shut behind us, cutting off the noise of the invading relatives. The lighting inside was dim, illuminating the tight, claustrophobic space. I was trapped between rows of canned goods and the towering presence of my husband. His chest was heaving. He smelled of cheap cologne and nervous sweat. Marcus backed me up against the wooden shelving. He reached into the pocket of his jeans, pulled out a crumpled, long piece of paper, and aggressively shoved it against my chest. I flinched as the paper fluttered down and landed on the floor between my feet. I looked down. It was a grocery receipt from an ultra-premium supermarket downtown. The total at the bottom was circled heavily in red ink, $1,200. You are going to pay this right now, Marcus hissed, leaning in so close I could feel the heat of his angry breath on my face. I already put it on my credit card, and my statement cuts tomorrow. I bought the premium steaks, the imported seafood, all the organic garbage Brittany wants, and the top-shelf liquor for my uncles. You are going to transfer those funds to my checking account immediately. And then you are going to get your lazy self into that kitchen and start prepping the marinades. I stared at him, my mind operating with a cold, terrifying clarity. This was the reality of my marriage. He was weaponizing my income to build his own patriarchal facade. He was using the money I bled for to buy his family's respect to play the role of the ultimate provider while simultaneously abusing the actual provider behind closed doors. You spent $1,200 of money you do not have to impress people who do not even respect you. I whispered, my voice dripping with venomous pity. I am not paying a single dime of that bill, and I am certainly not cooking for your disrespectful mother or your entitled sister-in-law. Marcus slammed his hand against the wooden shelf right next to my head. The loud crack made me flinch, sending another jolt of pain through my healing spine. You listen to me. He growled, his eyes wide and frantic. I am the man of this house. When my family comes to town, we show them respect. You make enough money to cover this without even blinking. Do not stand here and act like you are broke just to spite my mother. You are going to transfer the money, and you are going to smile while you serve my family their plates. If you embarrass me in front of them again, Nia, I swear you will regret it. I had to grip the edge of the pantry shelf to stay standing. My physical vulnerability was terrifying. If he decided to push me, my spine could literally shatter. But while my body was broken, my mind was absolute ice. I realized in that dark, cramped pantry that he did not just want my money. He demanded my total submission to validate his fragile masculinity. I did not scream. I did not cry. I looked down at the receipt on the floor, then slowly raised my eyes to meet his desperate, angry stare. You maxed out your credit card for a barbecue, I said, spacing out every word so the humiliation could sink deep into his skin. You are pathetic. His face contorted with rage. His hand twitched, a reflexive urge to strike me, but he caught himself. He knew better than to leave a visible mark on my face. Instead, he kicked the receipt across the floor so it hit my shoe. Transfer the money by tonight, Marcus sneered, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. Or I will log into the joint account and cancel the payment for your physical therapy appointments. Let us see how fast you heal when you cannot afford your medical care. With that final cowardly threat, he turned around and pushed the pantry door open. Instantly, his entire demeanor transformed. The abusive, desperate man vanished, replaced by the jovial, generous host. Who is ready for a drink? His voice boomed cheerfully down the hallway as he rejoined his family. I got the good stuff for us. I was left alone in the dim pantry. My legs were shaking from the pain of standing too long. I slowly bent my knees, keeping my spine perfectly straight, fighting back tears of sheer physical agony. I reached down and picked up the crumpled receipt. I smoothed the paper out against my thigh. This was no longer just a grocery bill. It was a receipt for his financial abuse. It was evidence. I carefully folded the paper and slid it into the deep pocket of my silk robe. I knew exactly what I had to do next. The war had officially started, and I was going to make sure he lost everything. What would you do if your partner threatened to cancel your medical care just to fund their family vacation? Let me know in the comments. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my silk robe over my rigid medical brace. I walked out of that dim pantry not as a defeated wife, but as a woman preparing for absolute war. The living room was already unrecognizable. The television was blaring a football game, and empty beer bottles were multiplying on my imported marble coffee table. I ignored them all, focusing only on the agonizing climb up the floating glass staircase to my master suite. The pain medication was wearing off. My spine felt like it was grinding against shattered glass. I needed to lie flat on my prescribed mattress before my legs gave out completely. I pushed open the heavy double doors to my bedroom, expecting the cool, quiet sanctuary I had meticulously designed. Instead, I found Odessa standing right in the middle of my custom walk-in closet. She was holding one of my expensive silk blouses against her chest and examining her reflection in my full-length mirror. She did not even flinch when I walked in. She simply tossed the delicate blouse carelessly onto a velvet ottoman and stepped out into the main bedroom area, rubbing her right knee with a highly theatrical grimace. This house is way too big, she complained, not bothering to make eye contact with me. These stairs are murder on my joints. I am a senior citizen, Nia. I cannot be expected to sleep in that cramped guest room at the end of the hall. The mattress feels like pure concrete. I need space to stretch out, and this room gets the best morning light. I stared at her, trying to process the sheer audacity. My master suite was not just a bedroom, it was my temporary staging headquarters. Because I was recovering from spinal fusion surgery, my home office downstairs was completely inaccessible to me. I had moved my drafting table, my fabric swatches, and my expensive 3D rendering equipment into the corner of the master suite so I could work from bed. This room held my medical supplies, my heating pads, and the custom $15,000 ergonomic mattress my surgeon had specifically prescribed for my recovery. You cannot sleep in here, I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. This is my bedroom. All my medical equipment is in here. The guest rooms have premium mattresses and ensuite bathrooms. You will be perfectly comfortable down the hall. Before Odessa could unleash her fake outrage, Marcus marched into the room. He had followed me upstairs, clearly anticipating a confrontation and eager to play the hero for his mother. Without a single word of greeting or a question about my pain levels, he immediately sided against me. "Do not be selfish, Naya," he snapped, walking right past me. "Mom has bad arthritis. She needs the adjustable bed. You can sleep downstairs on the sofa. It is closer to the kitchen anyway, so you can start cooking tonight without walking up and down the stairs." He did not wait for my response. He walked straight over to my staging corner and grabbed my high-end drafting tablet. He ripped the charging cord out of the wall, sending a stack of expensive fabric swatches crashing to the hardwood floor. "What are you doing?" I demanded, stepping forward. A sharp spike of pain radiated from my spine, forcing me to stop and grip the doorframe to keep from collapsing. Marcus ignored me completely. I watched him move like a wrecking ball through my personal space. He carried my drafting tablet and my laptop out into the hallway and carelessly dropped them onto the floor. He marched back into the room, grabbed my heavy baskets of staging props, my architectural magazines, and my personal skincare products from the vanity. He threw them out into the hallway one by one like he was taking out the trash. I stood in the doorway, physically trapped by the thick medical brace digging into my ribs. Looking down at my shaking hands and my bare feet surrounded by my scattered belongings, I felt the full weight of my vulnerability. Anyone looking down at this scene from above would see a woman trapped inside a plastic shell, struggling just to breathe while her husband towered over her, things tossing her livelihood aside with casual, ruthless cruelty. He was systematically dismantling my safe space right in front of my eyes. "Marcus." "I am 6 days post-op," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of physical agony and absolute rage. "I need this bed for my spine. If I sleep on that living room sofa, I could tear my stitches and end up back in the hospital." He did not care. He grabbed my silk pillows and shoved them hard into my arms. "You are exaggerating," he scoffed. "Black women are built tough. You will be fine on the sofa. Stop acting like a spoiled princess and show some respect to the woman who gave birth to me." Odessa smiled a wicked, triumphant smile as she kicked off her shoes and immediately lay back on my expensive sheets. "See," she purred, adjusting the duvet over her legs. "A good daughter-in-law knows her proper place. Just close the door on your way out, Nia. The draft from the hallway is bothering my joints." Marcus turned to his mother, his chest puffed out with that ridiculous fake pride. "Anything you need, Mom," he said loudly enough for his brother downstairs to hear. "My house is your house. We have plenty of space." Nia does not mind roughing it for a few days. She knows family comes first. I watched him perform this grotesque theater of the generous son. He was playing the wealthy provider, using the assets I bled for to buy his mother's affection. He was handing over a sanctuary he did not pay a single cent for, just to maintain his image. I gripped the doorframe tighter, fighting the urge to scream. My spine felt like it was on fire. Every nerve ending in my lower back was screaming for me to lie down on the firm support of my prescribed mattress. The living room sofa he was banishing me to was a low-profile, mid-century modern piece I had bought for staging a sleek, beautiful piece of furniture with absolutely zero back support. Sleeping on it would be pure torture. "Marcus," I said, forcing him to look at me. "The mortgage on this house is paid from my business account. This mattress your mother is currently putting her dirty feet on was paid for by my staging company. You do not get to evict me from my own bedroom so you can play the big man of the house." Odessa shot up from the pillows, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "Listen to how she talks to you, Marcus," she sneered, pointing a crooked finger at me. "This is what happens when you marry a woman who thinks her paycheck makes her a man. She has no respect for you, no respect for the natural order of things. In a real Christian home, the man is the head of the household regardless of who brings home the bacon. You need to put your wife in check before she embarrasses you in front of the whole family." Her words hit his deepest insecurity with pinpoint accuracy. Marcus tightened his jaw. The mask of the jovial host slipped, revealing the petty, fragile tyrant underneath. He marched up to me, his face inches from mine. "Get your stuff and get downstairs," he demanded through gritted teeth. "I am not going to let you disrespect my mother under my roof." My roof. The delusion was staggering. He was so desperate to maintain his illusion of control that he was willing to physically break his recovering wife to do it. He reached out and shoved my remaining medical supplies, a box of sterile bandages, and my prescription pain medications into my arms. The box slipped from my weak grasp and crashed to the floor, pills scattering across the polished wood. Neither of them moved to help me. Marcus simply stepped over the mess, grabbing the heavy brass handles of the double doors. "Take a hint, Nia," he said coldly. "The adults are trying to rest." He slammed the heavy master bedroom doors right in my face. The loud click of the lock echoed in the hallway. I stood there alone in the corridor, surrounded by my expensive staging equipment, my scattered pills, and my tossed clothing. The pain in my back was blinding, but the clarity in my mind was absolute. They had just stolen my sanctuary. They had chosen to inflict physical suffering on me for the sake of their own comfort and ego. I slowly bent my knees, keeping my spine perfectly rigid to pick up my scattered pain medication. I did not shed a single tear. Crying was for victims. I was simply a property owner dealing with a massive pest infestation, and it was time to prepare the extermination. Clutching the plastic bottle of painkillers in my trembling hand, I gathered my silk pillows and blankets from the hallway floor. Every step toward the floating glass staircase felt like wading through thick, wet cement. My spine throbbed with a relentless burning ache, but I refused to let my legs buckle or my posture falter. I carefully descended the steps, my hand gripping the cold metal railing so tightly my knuckles ached. I was preparing to enter a war zone, and I needed to project absolute invulnerability. The living room was a theater of male entitlement. Marcus stood by the marble kitchen island, holding court with a glass of my premium imported bourbon in his hand. Jamal sat sprawled across my custom white sofa, his muddy sneakers resting dangerously close to the delicate upholstery. When they saw me slowly descending the stairs, carrying my bedding like a banished servant, Marcus let out a sharp, triumphant laugh. He thought he had won. He genuinely believed that my physical descent mirrored a psychological surrender. "There she is," Marcus announced, gesturing toward me with his glass so his cousins could hear. "I told you she would come to her senses. A good wife always knows when to step back and let the family settle in." I did not say a word as I dropped my pillows onto the low-profile mid-century modern sofa. The piece of furniture was an expensive staging prop, beautiful to look at, but completely devoid of back support. I stood beside it, catching my breath, the rigid medical brace digging sharply into my ribs. "Now that you are down here," Marcus continued, his voice dripping with suffocating condescension, "go ahead and get those steaks started. Jamal and the boys are hungry. You can rest your back on that sofa after we eat." I turned to face him. The lingering effects of the anesthesia and the blinding physical pain were entirely burned away by the sheer heat of my fury. "I am not cooking your food, Marcus," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the noise of the television and the chatter of the relatives in the background. "And I am not your maid." Marcus slammed his heavy crystal glass down on the marble island. The sharp, aggressive clink made Jamal sit up instantly, sensing the volatile shift in the atmosphere. "Watch your tone when you speak to me in front of my family," Marcus barked, taking 2 aggressive steps toward me. "I told you upstairs, you are not going to disrespect me in my own house. Your house." The words tore from my throat before I could stop them. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh that stopped the surrounding cousins dead in their tracks. The fast, overlapping dialogue began to fly, snapping back and forth across the room like a physical whip. "Yes, my house." Marcus stepped closer, pointing a rigid finger at my chest. "I am the head of this family." "You are a fraud," I snapped back, looking him dead in the eye and refusing to flinch. "You do not own a single brick of this property. My LLC bought this penthouse 2 years before I even let you move in. I pay the mortgage, I pay the exorbitant property taxes, I pay the HOA fees, while you strut around playing the wealthy provider for an audience of freeloaders." "Shut your mouth," Nia, Marcus warned, his face turning a dangerous shade of ash. "No, let us tell your family the truth," I raised my voice, ensuring every single person in that open-concept living room could hear my exact words. "Let us talk about that matte black Mercedes parked downstairs. The one you post on Instagram every Sunday morning outside of megachurch with the hashtags blessed and boss moves. Should we tell Jamal that it is a lease? Should we tell him you are 3 months behind on the payments and the dealership is threatening to repossess it? I had to transfer $3,000 from my business account just last week so you could avoid the repo man dragging it out of our driveway." Marcus lunged forward, his hands balled into tight fists, but Jamal jumped up from the sofa and stepped between us, throwing his hands up. My eyes darted rapidly between my husband's humiliated, rage-filled face and his younger brother's defensive posture. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. "Whoa, hold on," Nia, Jamal interjected, puffing out his chest to shield his older brother. "You do not need to emasculate your husband like that. Marcus is the eldest. He carries the weight of this whole family. A man is a man regardless of who writes the check. You need to learn your place and stop tearing him down." "My place!" I turned my glare directly onto Jamal, my voice dripping with absolute disgust. "Do not stand in my living room and lecture me about my place. You want to talk about carrying the weight of the family? You want to talk about the black tax?" Jamal crossed his arms, leaning heavily into his misguided sense of traditional authority. "Yeah, I do. Marcus looks out for all of us. He is the pillar. You, as his wife, should be lifting him up, making sure he looks good, not keeping score of every dollar like a bitter, unsupportive woman. It is about respect. Our parents raised us to lead. He is not leading anyone," I fired back, pointing directly at Marcus, who was visibly shrinking behind his brother's defense. "He is financially bleeding me dry to fund your collective delusions. That black tax you all love to talk about, that cultural duty to lift up your community and your family, that is supposed to be about shared struggle and mutual elevation. It is not supposed to be a free pass for a grown man to act like a parasite just to maintain his fragile ego. You think Marcus gave you that $10,000 loan for your failed trucking business last year? He did not. He cried to me for 2 weeks until I pulled it from my hard-earned savings, so you would not have to file for bankruptcy." Jamal's jaw dropped open. He snapped his head to look at Marcus, betrayal washing over his features. "You said that money was from your quarterly bonus." "He lied," I stated coldly, snapping the attention back to me. "He lies to all of you to build his ego. He takes my money, slaps his name on it, and plays the king of the castle. You all sit around talking about traditional gender roles, demanding submissive women who cook and clean and bow down to the man of the house so his masculinity stays intact. But traditional men actually provide. Traditional men do not steal from their wives' medical funds to buy top-shelf liquor for a pool party. You want a traditional wife, Marcus, earn her." The room fell into a dead, suffocating silence. The television continued to hum in the background with the sounds of a sports game, but no one moved. The cousins standing near the kitchen island were staring at the floor, suddenly incredibly interested in their shoes. Brittany had peeked out from the hallway, her mouth zipped shut for once. Marcus looked like he had been physically gutted. His entire carefully curated persona had just been ripped to shreds in front of the very people he desperately wanted to impress. "You are going to regret saying that," Marcus whispered, his voice shaking with a terrifying quiet fury. "You just crossed a line you cannot uncross. The line was crossed when you threw me out of my own bed 6 days after spinal surgery," I replied, my voice perfectly steady, betraying none of the immense physical pain radiating through my back. Jamal, clearly humiliated by the public revelation of his business loans, scowled at me. "You are just a cold, arrogant woman. Marcus deserves better than a wife who throws her money in his face. And you deserve a brother who does not lie to you," I retorted smoothly. "But I guess we all have to settle for reality today." I did not wait for another response. The rapid-fire argument had drained the absolute last reserves of my physical strength. My legs were trembling so violently I thought I might collapse right there on the rug. I slowly turned my back on both of them, a deliberate display of profound disrespect. I lowered myself onto the staging sofa, gritting my teeth, as the flat, unyielding cushions pressed harshly against my surgical brace. I lay down carefully, adjusting my legs, and pulled my silk blanket up to my chin. I turned my face toward the back of the sofa, completely shutting them out. I could hear Marcus breathing heavily behind me. I could hear Jamal muttering under his breath about disrespectful modern women. But they did not touch me. The absolute public humiliation I had just delivered had paralyzed them. They were stripped of their illusions, left to stand in the wreckage of Marcus's fake wealth. As I lay there staring at the textured fabric of the sofa, I knew this was only the beginning. I had wounded his pride, which meant he would undoubtedly retaliate. He would try to take something from me to restore his fragile ego. But my trap was already being set. While they spent the next few days indulging in their toxic delusions, I would be quietly locking the doors to their reality. Let them have the living room. Let them have the master suite. Soon, they would not even have a sidewalk to stand on. The hours dragged on like a slow, agonizing crawl through broken glass. I remained perfectly still on that rigid staging sofa, facing the large floor-to-ceiling windows, while the chaotic reality of my hijacked home swirled behind me. My silence was my ultimate weapon, but to Marcus and his family, it looked exactly like submission. They genuinely believed my quiet retreat was a white flag. They thought my physical limitations meant my spirit had finally broken under the combined weight of their collective entitlement and toxic expectations. I could hear them in the kitchen celebrating their perceived victory. The familiar clinking of my imported crystal glasses echoed down the hallway, accompanied by loud, boisterous laughter. Marcus was holding court again, his voice booming with the artificial bravado of a man who thought he had successfully put his wife back in her place. He was pouring generous amounts of the top-shelf bourbon I had purchased for a corporate client event, handing out my hard-earned assets like they were his own personal party favors. I heard Jamal hyping him up, reinforcing the dangerous narrative that true manhood meant breaking a woman down until she handed over her wallet without question. "You really handled that, bro." Jamal slurred slightly, his words echoing off the marble countertops. She was getting way out of line. You have to nip that modern independent woman attitude in the bud before they think they run the show. She will be apologizing tomorrow morning once she realizes how cold it gets down here by herself. Marcus chuckled, a deep rumbling sound of pure, unchecked arrogance. Sometimes you just have to remind them who actually runs things, he replied, his tone dripping with unearned superiority. She will be fine by morning. She always bounces back when she realizes she needs this family to validate her. She talks a big game about her money, but at the end of the day, she is terrified of being alone. The sheer magnitude of his delusion was almost laughable. I did not need his family. I was the financial host feeding their entire parasitic ecosystem, but I let them talk. I lay there in the fading evening light, controlling my breathing to manage the sharp stabbing pains radiating from my surgical incision. Every time I shifted my weight, the thick Velcro straps of my medical brace dug mercilessly into my bruised skin. But the physical agony was absolutely nothing compared to the cold, calculating energy coursing through my veins. I was not a defeated wife sulking in the dark. I was a predator lying in wait. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, dark shadows across the living room, the house transformed into a playground for the invaders. I heard the heavy thud of footsteps upstairs as Odessa and Brittany settled into my luxurious master suite. They had successfully claimed my sanctuary, and they were not going to be quiet about it. I heard Brittany complaining loudly about the brand of organic shampoo in my ensuite bathroom, claiming it lacked the proper essential oils for her hair type. I heard Odessa ordering Marcus to march back up the stairs and bring her fresh towels, because the Egyptian cotton ones hanging on the heated rack were simply not fluffy enough for her liking. They were systematically tearing through my personal space, violating every boundary I had ever established, while treating my husband like an obedient errand boy. And he was doing it with a smile. Around 9 o'clock, the harsh overhead living room lights flicked off, leaving me completely engulfed in the darkness. The golden glow from the street lamps outside illuminated the dust motes dancing in the silent air. Heavy footsteps approached the sofa. I kept my eyes gently closed, feigning deep, exhausted sleep. But my senses were hyper-focused, tracking every single movement in the room. It was Odessa. She paused right beside the edge of the sofa. I could smell the heavy, suffocating scent of her cheap floral perfume mixed with the expensive lotion she had just stolen from my vanity. She stood there for a long moment, simply looking down at me. I could feel her smug, immense satisfaction radiating like heat from a furnace. "I told you, Brittany," she whispered loudly enough for her daughter-in-law to hear from the base of the glass staircase. "You just have to break their spirit early. These career women think their little business degrees make them special, but at the end of the day, they all end up sleeping on the couch if they forget how to serve their men. A smart man knows how to break a stubborn horse." Brittany let out a soft, condescending giggle, letting her heavy footsteps join Odessa's near my head. "It is honestly embarrassing," she whispered back, her voice laced with racial microaggressions she barely tried to hide. "I would never let Jamal treat me like that, but then again, I know how to be a real supportive wife. She probably deserves this for acting so aggressive and superior all the time. Good night, Nia. Sweet dreams on that cheap sofa."